Carl Jung, one of the great explorers of the human psyche, believed that the journey toward individuation, the process of becoming truly oneself, was, for the most part, a solitary one. But being alone does not mean being isolated from the world. Rather, it means diving deep into one's own mind, free from the distractions and influences that pull us away from our true essence. We live in a time when solitude is often seen as a problem. The constant noise of social media, societal expectations, and external pressures leads us to believe that being alone is a sign of failure or inadequacy. But does this belief strengthen us or weaken us? Jung understood that the human psyche develops through contact with the unconscious, and this is only possible when we create space for silence. He once said, "Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakens." What does this mean? It means that to understand who we truly are, we must step away from the influence of the masses and turn inward to our own world. Solitude, when properly understood, is not a punishment, but an opportunity. It is within it that we encounter our shadows, the repressed aspects of our personality, unresolved traumas, unacknowledged desires. We flee from solitude because we fear what we might find within. Yet, it is precisely in this encounter that the key to personal growth lies. Many of history's greatest thinkers, artists, and creators have embraced solitude to nurture their genius. Nietzsche wandered alone through the mountains. Thoreau sought solitude in nature to understand the essence of life, and Jung himself spent long periods isolated in his tower in Bollingen, where he explored his dreams and his unconscious. Isolation gave them mental clarity, allowed them to hear themselves without external interference, and helped them understand their own depths. However, being alone does not simply mean physically distancing oneself from people. True solitude is a state of mind, an internal space where we disconnect from external voices and listen to our own. It is in this space that we can ask ourselves, what do I truly want? What do I truly feel? Who am I beyond the roles I play in society? The truth is that without periods of solitude, we become prisoners of collective identity. We wear masks to fit in, repeat patterns without questioning them, follow paths without asking if they are truly ours. Jung called this living under the persona, the aspect of our psyche that molds itself to the world's expectations. But individuation requires us to detach from this persona and discover our essence. Therefore, being alone is not just a temporary state, but an essential practice. Learning to be comfortable in our own presence, accepting our contradictions, and developing an authentic inner dialogue may be the most powerful path for the mind. Because, as Jung teaches us, the journey of self-knowledge is, inevitably, a solitary one. So what if, instead of fearing solitude, we embraced it as a gateway to true mental freedom? If we started seeing solitude as a gift, we would realize that it doesn't weaken us, it strengthens us. The fear of being alone often comes from the belief that we need constant validation from others to exist. But this traps us in an endless pursuit of external acceptance, pulling us further away from our true essence. Jung spoke about the importance of the self, the totality of the psyche, encompassing both the conscious and the unconscious. To become who we truly are, we must integrate aspects of ourselves that we often ignore or reject. Solitude gives us the chance to look inward, to confront ourselves, and more importantly, to reconcile with what we find. But why is it so hard to be alone? Because from an early age, we are conditioned to fill every moment of silence with distractions. Social media, constant entertainment, excessive work, these things keep us busy enough to avoid facing ourselves. The problem is that this escape distances us from one of life's most enriching experiences, self-knowledge. Solitude can be uncomfortable at first. When we are alone, we are forced to deal with thoughts and feelings we may have avoided for years. Painful memories, insecurities, hidden fears, all of it surfaces in the silence. But this is the great opportunity. If we have the courage to face what arises, we emerge stronger, more authentic, and more whole. Jung also spoke of the hermit archetype, present in many spiritual and mythological traditions. The hermit is the one who withdraws from the world in search of wisdom. He does not retreat out of disdain for society, but because he understands that certain truths can only be found in the silence of introspection. He returns transformed, bringing with him a new vision of himself and the world. Does this mean we should all live in isolation? Of course not. Solitude is not a permanent state, but a necessary cycle in the human journey. Alternating moments of solitude with moments of social connection creates a healthy balance. When we learn to be alone, we no longer depend on others to fill our inner voids. And paradoxically, this makes us more capable of building authentic relationships, as we connect from a place of wholeness rather than neediness. The truth is, if we never allow ourselves to be alone, we never truly know ourselves. And if we don't know ourselves, how can we expect to live a life that truly belongs to us? How can we make decisions aligned with our essence? How can we find a genuine purpose? In the end, being alone may be the best path for the mind because it frees us from the illusion that we need the world to be complete. It shows us that true strength doesn't come from external approval, but from the ability to be at peace in our own company. Silence may be intimidating, but it is within it that we find the answers we seek. When we embrace solitude as an essential part of our growth, we begin to see that it is not an emptiness to be filled, but a fertile space for transformation. Carl Jung believed that every human being carries within them a duality, the tension between the conscious and the unconscious, between the persona we show to the world and the shadow we conceal. Solitude gives us the opportunity to balance these forces, allowing us to integrate the rejected aspects of our psyche. The process of individuation, a central concept in Jung's work, only occurs when we become individuals in the truest sense of the word. Beings who are not merely reflections of society, but who possess their own authentic identity. And this path inevitably requires moments of stepping away from the collective. But solitude is not just a psychological tool. It has a deep spiritual function. Throughout history, we see that great mystics, philosophers, and sages have spent significant periods alone. Buddha found enlightenment after years of solitary meditation. Jesus spent 40 days in the desert. Jung, in his tower in Bollingen, dedicated himself to a dialogue with his own unconscious, recording his visions in the Red Book. In these cases, solitude did not mean isolation from the world, but rather a profound dive into inner truth. However, many people fear this process because they confuse solitude with abandonment. Feeling lonely is different from being alone. Conscious solitude is a choice, a search for clarity, while the feeling of abandonment comes from a lack of connection with oneself. Often, we are surrounded by people and yet feel lonely. This happens because we are not truly connected to who we are. But how can we turn solitude into an enriching experience? First, we need to reframe it. Instead of seeing it as a punishment, we can recognize it as a gift. In moments of silence, we can write, meditate, reflect on our choices, and listen to the inner voices we usually drown out. Journaling, for example, was a powerful tool used by Jung to understand his unconscious. Writing freely helps reveal hidden patterns, repressed desires, and valuable insights about ourselves. Additionally, it's important to cultivate moments of solitude even when we are surrounded by others. Creating an internal space of silence, learning to be present with ourselves, and letting go of the constant need for external stimulation. All of this strengthens the mind and gives us greater clarity to navigate life with autonomy. Modern society pushes us toward constant hyperconnectivity, making us believe that solitude is something to be avoided at all costs. But Jung teaches us that true growth happens in retreat. If we never step away from the noise of the world, we will never hear our own voice. In the end, the question we should ask ourselves is not, how can I avoid solitude? But rather, what does my solitude have to teach me? Solitude, when properly embraced, becomes a gateway to self-awareness and true freedom. However, this journey requires courage, as being alone often means confronting truths we have avoided for years. It is in the absence of external distractions that we hear our inner voices, and some of them can be unsettling. Carl Jung warned us about the power of the shadow, the repressed and unconscious part of our psyche. The shadow holds everything we refuse to accept about ourselves: fears, unspoken desires, traumas, and aspects of our personality we reject in order to fit into society. When we are constantly surrounded by people, occupied with tasks, and immersed in the endless flow of information, we manage to avoid this confrontation. But in solitude, there is no escape. And that is precisely what makes it so powerful. When we allow ourselves to engage with our shadow, we begin to integrate the parts of us that were once fragmented. This process makes us more whole, more authentic. Jung said, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." Illumination, therefore, does not come from denying our darkness, but from accepting and integrating these hidden parts. But how can we turn this encounter with the shadow into something positive? The first step is to stop running from discomfort. Often, when we are alone, we feel an unease, an almost compulsive need to fill the void with something: social media, television, meaningless conversations. But what if, instead, we allowed silence to speak? What if we sat with our thoughts, no matter how uncomfortable, and simply observed them? The practice of self-observation is essential in this process. In moments of solitude, we begin to notice thought patterns that previously went unnoticed. What internal dialogues dominate our mind? Are they critical voices? Are they fears? Are they unfulfilled dreams? When we start paying attention, we gain the opportunity to transform these patterns. Another key aspect is developing emotional autonomy. Many people seek relationships or social interactions not out of a genuine need for connection, but to avoid facing themselves. This creates relationships based on dependency, where the presence of another serves only to fill an internal void. But when we learn to be at peace with ourselves, we start choosing relationships out of true affinity, not neediness. Furthermore, being alone allows us to explore our passions and interests without the influence of others' opinions. Often, our choices are shaped by what is expected of us. But in solitude, we can rediscover our true desires. What truly moves us? What inspires us? What makes us feel alive? Ultimately, solitude teaches us a profound lesson. We are not defined by how others see us. When we are constantly surrounded by people, we tend to identify with the image we project for them. But in solitude, that mask falls away, and we see ourselves as we truly are. This is the first step toward genuine freedom. So instead of fearing solitude, we can welcome it as an ally. Because it is within it that we discover our true strength, our true essence. And perhaps, instead of asking, "How can I avoid solitude?" we should start asking, "What can I learn from it?" When we begin to see solitude as a tool for growth, we realize that it is not the end, but the beginning of a deeper journey. This journey leads us to greater emotional autonomy, mental clarity, and self-knowledge. However, there is a curious paradox. By learning to be alone, we actually become better at relating to others. Carl Jung saw the process of individuation as a balance between the inner and outer worlds. He understood that self-knowledge does not mean permanent isolation, but rather the ability to connect with oneself without losing touch with the world. Many people fear solitude because they believe it will distance them from others. But in reality, the person who knows themselves deeply is the one who engages in relationships with the most authenticity. This happens because, by facing our shadow and accepting our imperfections, we stop projecting them onto others. In our interactions, we unconsciously project our insecurities and fears, judge others' flaws because we haven't accepted our own, and seek in others the validation we can't find within ourselves. When we spend time alone and work on these aspects, we stop projecting and start seeing others as they truly are, without the filters of our own psyche. Another essential lesson solitude teaches us is the difference between true connection and emotional dependence. Many people enter relationships, whether romantic, friendly, or familial, driven by the fear of being alone rather than genuine affinity. This results in superficial or even toxic relationships where one person leans on the other without true mutual growth. But when we are comfortable in our own company, we choose to be with others out of genuine desire, not need. Beyond its psychological and emotional aspects, solitude also has cognitive benefits. Research suggests that moments of solitude enhance creativity, concentration, and problem-solving skills. Away from constant distractions, the brain has time to process information more deeply. Many of the greatest advancements in science, art, and philosophy have emerged from moments of introspection and voluntary isolation. But if solitude is so powerful, why do so many people avoid it? The answer lies in modern culture, which promotes constant distraction. We have never been more connected, yet never more disconnected from ourselves. Social media, on-demand entertainment, and endless notifications create a state of hyperstimulation that prevents us from being alone with our thoughts. We flee from silence because we fear what it might reveal. However, the truth is that we only find peace when we stop running. The external world will never be enough to fill an internal void. We can travel to distant places, have thousands of followers, be surrounded by friends, but if we are not at peace with ourselves, all of it will be nothing more than a temporary distraction. Jung teaches us that the true encounter with the self happens only in silence, in introspection, in the courage to look within. Solitude is not a burden, but a call to this journey. And the question remains, are you willing to listen to what your own mind has to say? If we are willing to listen to what our own mind has to say, we will realize that solitude is not an abyss to be avoided, but a territory to be explored. At first, this territory may seem intimidating, as it reveals not only our strengths, but also our flaws, fears, and contradictions. However, Jung reminds us that wholeness can only be achieved when we embrace both light and shadow. Many people feel anxious at the thought of being alone because they have never learned how to relate to themselves. From an early age, we are taught to seek answers outside of ourselves, in the opinions of others, in social norms, in constant busyness. Few of us are encouraged to look inward, to cultivate a healthy inner dialogue, to develop a friendship with our own mind. But imagine the opposite. What if solitude were not an enemy, but a teacher? What if we saw it as an opportunity to dive deeper into our own existence? What if, instead of fearing it, we used it to reflect on our choices, examine our most authentic desires, and free ourselves from external influences that shape us without us even realizing it? The truth is, solitude, when well used, makes us stronger. Instead of seeking distractions to escape from ourselves, we can use that time to understand who we really are. We can learn to listen to our thoughts without judgment, to face our fears without being controlled by them, and to find a purpose that is not imposed from the outside, but comes from within. And there is immense freedom in this. When we learn to be comfortable alone, we become less susceptible to external pressures. We begin to make choices with greater clarity because we are no longer trying to please others or follow standards that don't resonate with us. We develop an inner confidence that doesn't rely on external validation, giving us true power over our own lives. Jung knew that real growth does not come from conformity, but from the ability to dive into the depths of one's own psyche. In his tower in Bollingen, he experienced solitude consciously, not as an escape from the world, but as a return to himself. He wrote, reflected, painted, engaged in deep conversations with his unconscious, and documented his experiences. This time alone was essential for both his psychological theories and his own individuation. And if it worked for one of history's greatest thinkers, why wouldn't it work for us? Perhaps the real question is not, how can I avoid solitude? But how can I use it for my growth? Silence can be a wiser guide than any external voice. In solitude, we discover the truth about ourselves. And once we know that truth, we are free to live by it. So, what would your mind tell you if you finally stopped to listen? Solitude may just be the best path for your mind, if you have the courage to walk it. If this video gave you new perspectives, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. It helps us continue bringing deep and reflective content about the human mind. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching this video from? I'd love to know how far this message is reaching.